First, congratulations to Gary and Chris and the AWB team on a fantastic remodel. I was here right before the holidays and saw what was about to happen. And I mean, to see this beautiful mural in the background, I went over to Sean Egan. I said, now is that the Port of Tacoma? And he was very quick to say, Northwest Seaport Alliance, which he was on brand. But also, I think that's a very good example. It's still a model for the entire state and how governments can work together and find partnership after years of competition and working maybe not in full partnership, but now they've found a path together and they're serving their constituents in a really remarkable way. So it's still something that we hold as the standard for how we can make government work. Someone said to me this morning that we have 25 business days left in this session. So we are running out of runway here. We're getting to the end, even though we're just about to hit policy cutoff here. But I thought what I would do is just give kind of a broad brush of the governor's economic policy agenda and his jobs plan and what his top priorities are, and leave it to some of my colleagues here to talk about the on-the-ground legislative priorities. The economy is running very hot, as you know. We've got one of the fastest growing economies in the country right now. Unemployment is down to some of the lowest it's been since the 70s. In fact, for the first time in 8 years, unemployment is down to single digits in every single county. We've grown over 300,000 jobs since 2013. And just a few months ago, CNBC ranked us the #1 state in the country for doing business. Nonetheless, there are still pockets of the state that are in recovery mode, or maybe they missed the boom entirely. And a lot of our focus, what the governor is interested in doing, is focusing our economic development opportunities on lifting up those people and places that are still hurting, that need the tools and the technology to compete in the 21st century economy. So it's about sustaining economic growth, but broadening those economic benefits across the state. And I know that that's something that is important to AWB as well, that rural economic development. So for the governor, there's 3 pillars to this. First is talent, and that's growing our own people to fill those jobs of tomorrow. That means education. We've nearly doubled the amount of dollars that are going into public education. But beyond that, workforce training, making sure that our workforce system is tied to the needs of industry. One of the models that we're looking at is in Switzerland, where people graduate from high school, not just with a diploma, but with the skills to go immediately into the job market. Talent also means being an open state to the best and the brightest from all around the world. And when there's been efforts to push people out, we have been an open state and tried to ensure that that kind of talent is able to come into the state. There was an incident, Dr. Ala Alawan, who happened to be from Iraq, he was coming to a conference being put on by Melinda Gates. We were able to bring him in and make sure that that talent came to Washington State. So talent is key. Second, connectivity. In addition to being open to talent, we need to be open to trade. We're one of the most trade-dependent states in the country, as many of you know. It's not just about exports of aircraft or software. It's agriculture as well. Most of our pears and apples go to Canada and to Mexico. So those North American trade partnerships are key, and we need to keep those relationships going well. In addition to trade, connectivity is about infrastructure. And we worked hand in hand, and I really want to thank Gary and Chris, and especially Mike Ennis in the back, for all of their work, and the entire board at AWB for focusing on the Connecting Washington package and helping us get that across the finish line a couple of years ago. We can all be proud as a state. In the last 2 years, we have secured $70 billion of infrastructure investments. Very few states can claim that. Nonetheless, there's still a traffic problem. With all these jobs, people want to come to Washington State. That's putting a lot of pressure on an infrastructure system that wasn't designed to handle that. So traffic is still an ongoing problem, and that's something that we're focused on as well. In addition to infrastructure, connectivity is about broadband access. This is a top priority for the governor. In our budget, we put together a broadband fund and a broadband office to help tackle this issue. 14% of our rural areas are still unserved or underserved. We know there are pockets that need this technology, and it's not just about being able to connect with the economy. Some of this is about healthcare, it's about education, it can be about public safety. So it really is the telephone or the electricity that once was important back in the 1920s and 30s. Now, for the 20-teens and the 2020s, it's all about rural broadband and connectivity. Finally, innovation. It's no secret that the governor loves technology. He loves bragging about our state and talking about we're early adopters of technology. We cultivate and nurture innovation, and that's something he takes to heart. And I'll just give an example. We've talked, Mike and I were talking earlier about autonomous vehicles, and he's taken a light regulatory touch to this. He wants to make sure that we don't rush to put this in a box or stifle this kind of innovation. And because of that, we've seen 20 AV technology companies come to Washington State. So it's been a recruitment tool for us as well. So those are the three pillars that all focus on: talent, connectivity, innovation. And it's something that informs our work, not just during legislative session, but throughout the interim. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to continue to partner with AWB on all of these initiatives and get them across the finish line. So with that, thank you.
All right, do I have to do something special here? Can you hear me? Oh, this thing. Okay, we have two mics going here. All right. Well, thank you, Sandy, for that great introduction. I actually know a few of you out here, so it's good to see some friendly faces. But for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lauren McCloy. I just started over at the governor's office in October. Prior to that, as Sandy mentioned, I was over at the Utilities and Transportation Commission working on legislative issues for them. So, the friendly faces that I see here in the audience are mostly from my experience working there. So, as everyone knows, another huge issue for the governor this year is climate. He has introduced a carbon tax bill that was introduced at the very beginning of the session. Just last night or this morning, I'm not sure exactly when, but there was a substitute posted. So some of you may have had a chance to look at that. We've been working pretty closely with Senators Carlisle and Palumbo in the Senate on trying to craft a substitute that I think reflects a whole lot of stakeholder engagement, which is really exciting. This has been really some of the most engagement that we've had on this issue, at least as long as I've been paying attention. We've gotten a lot of input from both the business community as well as advocates on the environmental side and social justice side, and as well as other legislative interests as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this looks moving forward. I will say the substitute makes some pretty substantial changes, and I can get into that later if you have questions. But what we're really just mostly excited about is to just see the momentum around this discussion this year. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. We're looking to hopefully get the bill out of committee and make it through the process. So we look forward to working with all of you on that going forward. I was taking notes while Charles was talking because it's interesting. Those three pillars really carry through in this specific legislative proposal as well. I mean, the number one priority for the governor is just making sure that we have a holistic carbon policy that will actually help reduce emissions in Washington State. And that's the number one goal of this policy. We're really looking at trying to make sure that the policy design will actually help the state meet those statutory goals that were passed by the legislature. But on top of that, there's a lot of good stuff in here for rural economic development, jobs, infrastructure investments, and innovation as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specifics, and then if folks have questions, happy to talk a little bit more. But specifically on the rural economic development side, this is about providing jobs in both the clean energy industry and making sure that workers in affected industries have the tools that they need in order to transition. If there's impacts to economic activity and industries that are affected by the tax, we want to make sure that those folks have both the skills and the tools that they need to continue to be active in the workforce, and especially in rural areas. And then it's also designed to help support the next generation of Washington's workforce. The bill proposes to create 3 centers of excellence within the community and technical colleges system that would focus on renewable energy development, smart grid technologies, the next generation of hydropower, and forest products. So, we've been kind of working on the details of what these would look like. I think folks in industry, are probably familiar with the centers of excellence model. We currently have 10 in the community and technical colleges system, and this would expand that around these renewable energy and climate goals. And then infrastructure investments are a huge part of this. There's, a lot of the revenue, about 50% of the revenue is dedicated for infrastructure that actually reduces emissions in Washington state. Then there's also a pot of money for what we're calling natural resources resilience investments. These would be things to deal with stormwater, wildfire prevention and suppression, and potentially culverts, fish passage, things like that. And this is really just about ensuring that Washington has the money and the revenue that it needs in order to help it become more resilient to climate risk, because that's an essential element of this policy. And then finally, on the innovation front, one of the unique elements of this policy is that we actually see a lot of investment happening in innovation and technology by partnering with the private sector. So specifically, this bill has what we're calling a clean energy investment fund that will have utilities actually reinvesting some of their carbon tax liability into things on their own system that help them both reduce emissions and also support clean technology innovation in the energy space. So this would be things like, potentially smart meters, battery storage, solar, wind, energy efficiency, industrial efficiency products, things of that nature. And then also there's a specific carve out in that pool of money for research and development for sort of advanced technology in this space. So those are really kind of the high level points. Beyond that, it's a tax bill. I think everybody's seen it. If you have specific questions about the details, I'm happy to talk about it. And with that, I think I'll pass it on to Scott. So thank you for your time.
So before I get started, cookies and milk for Gary. This goes back to 1995 when I was a pain in his ass. We were having a hard time trying to figure out how to work through a small issue called matka. And I brought milk and cookies. We sat down in his office and Jim Buck laughed at us, but we worked through it. And what that has done is changed our working relationship from 1995 to this point, and I am grateful for that. So we joke about it all the time, about where's my milk and cookies. So I saw him in the parking lot. He reminded me when I got home last night, I made cookies. So, friendship matters in this business. Before I get started about what some of the governor's priorities are and the budget, as Sandy and I were sitting here catching up, we were both talking about the pace of this session. Yeah, it's unbelievable. The number of bills that have been moving around, the number of hearings and stuff is phenomenal. But what you also don't see is what's below the waterline going on at the agency level that also informs the legislative process. So we're almost at the end of week 4. 3,300 3,300 separate fiscal notes. Just think about that. 3,300 fiscal notes have been requested and put into the system. So we are now into quantity versus quality. So if you've got complaints, get in line. I mean, it's just, people don't see it, but as you were on staff, it is a lot of work on both sides, for the administration and the legislative side for fiscal notes. And I wish that the chairs would do a better job about requesting fiscal notes on bills that are actually going to move. Because you know that there aren't going to be 3,300 bills that move through the system. It just isn't going to happen. There are different ways to get those numbers. And sometimes that fiscal note won't make a difference. A lot of times it won't make a difference. So that just reinforces what we all are kind of feeling. We're tired, but there's just that incredible volume. Thanks to Charles and Lauren. I won't repeat what they said. I want to talk about some of the Gov's priorities. Some of you were helpful. Some of you were frustrated, but at least we got Hearst out of the way. Yeah. And it's just another chapter in water law, right, Kathleen? It's not a perfect bill, but it is a bill that moves us forward. What it? Oh, it's going to have a fiscal note. And we're already getting some grief from the legislative staff about the cost of the fiscal note, but it is going to be real. And the question is going to be, how do you pay for Hearst? Are you going to pay for it out of operating funds, or are you going to pay for it out of bond funds? And there will be a path forward to implement the bill. I think that will get resolved. Passing Hearst enabled the capital budget to happen. Yeah, it's a biennial budget in a supplemental year, but the bill happened and it got signed, and we're grateful that got passed, which has enabled everything else to come forward, which has been the pace. Governor signed 4 bills so far. Last one was the Andy Hill Cancer Memorial, which was signed yesterday, and their room was full of cancer care people and the family, and that was really kind of a nice thing to do there. So let me talk about the priorities. Access to democracy, about voting. Automatic voter registration, same-day registration for elections, and the Voting Rights Act. And there are a variety of opinions on those bills, but there is an interest to try to help move forward on access to democracy. Opioids. If you're not paying attention, it's a problem out there. We lose 2 Washingtonians a day to an opioid-related death. It's a lot of, and that's unfortunate and it's tragic. We see it on the streets, and when you see it on the streets, they're ending up in the jails or they're ending up in the hospitals, and it's just costing a lot of money to try to deal with it that way. You're seeing several cities and a couple counties sue the pharma industry over the opioids because that's one of the ways they think they can get to it. We're trying to put more money into treatment, and we're trying to do a better job there with crisis response out at the local level with those opioids response. And what we're hearing from the local cops, they're not used to this. This is a new thing for them, having to deal with people who are in crisis from an opioid addiction. And they don't know how to handle it, so we're trying to work with the cops on how to deal with that mental health or that substance abuse problem there. Lauren talked about carbon pollution. I won't dwell on that. Behavioral health integration, that's a bill from last year that we're continuing to move forward on how to try to integrate physical health and behavioral health there. Those are the bills that the governor actually has his name on. The administration has a whole bunch more. I think there's 60 some odd agency request bills that are out there floating around. He's also interested in, no surprise, on guns. He would like to have a ban on bump stocks. He would like to have safe storage of weapons and background checks for long or assault type rifles. He'd like to end the death penalty. He's taken executive action to hold the death penalty. I think there are 8 or 9, in this case men, they're all men, on death row waiting for that part of the justice system to continue to work through. I think the longest one sitting on death row is well over 2 decades. So he has an interest in that. Charles talked about rural broadband, and my automobile people are here. We're interested in zero emission vehicles, or ZEV, and how we can move forward on that, how to bring more ZEV vehicles into the state, and how to change the incentive bill for electric vehicles, which the ZEV vehicles would also apply for. Let's spend a little bit of time on the budget. I know most of you don't ever deal with the budget, but there are 3 budgets. There's an operating budget, there's a capital budget, and there's a transportation budget. In the operating budget, legislature, when they left town it was July, it wasn't that long ago, they made a bunch of heroic assumptions in the bill that there would be assumed savings to the tune of about $400 million. The budget, it doesn't balance, and for those of us that have been doing this for a while, who remembers Initiative 601? Remember all the gimmicks? We did all kinds of gimmicks to get around 601. Well, the new gimmick factory is the 4-year outlook. And that's where a lot of these things will show up in the budget. We assume, we believe, or we think will happen. And so you get those showing up in the budget, which implies that it will help the 4-year outlook. So there's now this new gimmick factory for the 4-year outlook. The 4-year outlook has also had value. It does provide some discipline and some thought process in the budgeting, but we all figure out a way to get around it when there is a pothole in the road. And then there's about $600 million of additional spending that we need to do in there. We've got to continue making progress on the mental health. We're still in trouble with the feds at Western State and Eastern State. Michael's nodding his head because he lives up there, but it's a big deal. The next one that's coming, and this is from CMS also, is for the DD community in the RHCs. Those are the residential rehabilitation centers where you've got families who have their loved ones staying there. They're old, they're falling apart, we've underinvested in them, and CMS is now calling us on the carpet for that also. So we got to continue to make investments there. Education. You've probably been paying attention to McCloy. Legislature is this close to getting it done. And the court, when they came out with their decision this fall, said, you are really close, but the last thing we would like you to do is to accelerate the 1 year of spending for teacher salaries. And the governor has said, I want to finish the job so we can get done and move on to other things. So he proposed to take $950 million out of reserves. I'll say this again, out of reserves, not out of the budget stabilization account. Remember, there are 2 pots. Reserves, just think of that as your savings account, and think of the budget stabilization account as a CD. It's harder to get money out of the CD than it is out of the savings account. He proposed taking the money out of the reserves, putting it into the salaries for teachers, and carrying forward all of the accountability measures that the legislature wanted for school districts on that spending to make it happen, get done, and move on to other issues. We would propose to fill up the savings account with income from the carbon tax, and then be done and move on to those other issues. One time. We'll see how the legislature deals with this. Some are going, I don't know if we can do this. And they're also just thinking they're frustrated with the court, but we've got to resolve this and move forward. Charles talked about career-connected learning, talked about the economy, talked about carbon, talked about rural, I talked about opioids, mental health, dreamers. There's an interest to continue working on making Washington a safe place for all of the kids that are here or the immigrants that are here from a dreamer status. Housing. My friends BAW and the realtors know there are a lot of bills this year dealing with housing one way or another. Some you're going to like, some you're not going to like, but there's a lot of discussion about affordability, and affordability means something different to all of us in the room. There's a lot of conversation about housing. I talked about democracy, census. I'll close with the census. You're going to see resolutions and bills dealing with the census, because we're not going to get as much help out of our federal partners on the census, and the census is an important tool that helps drive money back to the state through the variety of the federal programs. So we want to make sure that we get the best count that we can get in order to help make that happen. And there's some belief that we're on the bubble for maybe an 11th congressional seat because of the population growth. So you'll see a lot of conversation toward the end about the census. I'll stop, and the three of us will answer questions.